going to start letting people in. But
Great.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to take a couple of minutes to let people get connected. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, where you're from, what organization or faith community you are with, and we will get started here very shortly. So thank you for being here. Valerie, I see your hand up. Did you have a question before we get started? No question? Was it an accident? Might have been an accident. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just get started with the introductions. So welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for being here with us today. My name is Geneva Blackmer. I'm the Interim Executive Director for the Interfaith Center at Miami University. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that seeks to unify people through relationship building, dialogue, and social action. And we are very happy to have Amy Fraler. Did I say your name correctly? I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you earlier. Is it Fraler? Fraler. There we go. Amy Fraler is a doctoral student in Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Gratz College and a Third Order Franciscan. She presents widely on the intersection of Holocaust rescue and moral theology, engaging audiences ranging from elementary through university students to adult educators and community organizations. With that, I will turn it over to you, Amy. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Geneva, for having me to the Interfaith Center and to all of you for joining me. It is my great pleasure to share with you my love for studying Holocaust rescuers and exploring what their implications are for the interfaith community. When I began studying the graduate degree in religious education a few years ago, I really wanted to know who actually loves their neighbor as themselves. How did they get there? And how can we use their example? And I couldn't think of a data set until I happened upon an article about Kiyun Sugihara, the Japanese righteous among the nations. And I thought, here's my data set. Here's a population of people who love their neighbor as themselves when it was most risky to do so. So with that, we will begin our presentation. So the column on the left lists the criteria for being recognized as the righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem, which is an honor extended to those who assisted Jews during the Holocaust. There were people who helped in exchange for money, goods, property, and other things. And while there is still merit to those cases because they were risking their lives, they do not qualify as altruistic or selfless, and they were more likely to betray or abandon those who sought their assistance. And the column on the right lists the criteria for being recognized as a saint by the Catholic Church. So I'm not arguing that all of the righteous qualify as Catholic saints because obviously they're not Catholic. However, They were extraordinary in their virtue and their willingness to risk their lives and their families' lives to assist their persecuted neighbors. They transcended the boundaries of faith, culture, and ethnicity, which makes them particularly meaningful for this moment in time too. Now, there are limitations to using the righteous as a body of exemplars. For one thing, it overlooks rescuers of other persecuted groups, such as the Roma, gay or queer people, as well as Jehovah's Witnesses. Their rescue and accounts of the rescue is almost entirely absent from the historical record, which is very unfortunate, and it's important to recognize that void. So far, I've only encountered one person who focused on rescuing gay men, and that was a Dutch Catholic lawyer named Lo Mazerel. It's also important to recognize that the righteous doesn't recognize Jews who helped rescue Jews or other non-Jewish people during the Holocaust, which also happened. So it's good to keep these limitations in mind, and to also know that the risks for rescue varied according to where people lived. So the Nazis considered the Slavic races to be less human or less lower on the racial hierarchy than, say, the Aryan and the Nordic races, but still above Jews. So any Slavic people who engaged in rescue faced far worse repercussions for engaging in rescue. Sometimes for Polish people, their whole village would be burned down, their children would be killed. So even though there were these extraordinary risks, many of them still did engage in rescue. Now, if a Dutch or a Danish person was caught helping a Jew, the repercussions were still, they still might be imprisoned, they might be sent to a camp, but the consequences would not be extended to the entire family. It's also important to know that topography was a significant factor in rescue. It was much easier to hide people if you lived in a forest or a mountainous area versus open plains. So just to keep this contextualized, only 0.5% of the non-Jewish European population is estimated to have engaged in rescue during World War II. And this is a very bleak statistic, particularly since Europe was a mostly Christian continent. Why did so few people answer the call to care for their neighbor? This is a deeply distressing statistic, and I really don't have a good answer as to why this was the case. Now, here's a fascinating bit of information. Albania is a majority Muslim country, yet was the only Nazi-occupied country which had more Jews after the war than before. Only 2 Jewish families are known to have been captured. The Albanian Jewish population and all Jews who sought refuge in Albania from other countries were protected. So that's over 2,000. And Jewish survivors from Albania told Yad Vashem that Albanians sometimes competed for the honor of sheltering Jews, which happened nowhere else in Europe. Albania has a history of religious tolerance due to forced conversions during the Ottoman rule of the 1400s. And even today, other religions coexist peacefully. So Besa is the Albanian code of honor, which continues today as the moral code of Albania. And it's held by Albanians of all faiths, and it means to keep the promise. So one who acts according to Besa is someone who keeps his word, and Albanians upheld this Besa for Jews who sought their protection. Pictured is Atif Toptani with his son Eddie. Atif's father was the Albanian ambassador to Vienna before the war, and Atif was very familiar with Germany and German culture. Atif's wife became friendly with Jewish refugees who knit sweaters at a local store. And when she used to send food for the family to share with amongst themselves and for any other Jewish refugees. When Gani met, Atif's wife learned that Germans were planning to round up the Jews. She summoned them to her house to warn them, but Atif arrived and took the Jewish knitters he took them into his house first. When that became risky, he began moving them among different locations and ultimately separating a family of 5. And this entire family survived the war, and Atif took personal responsibility for providing for all of their needs during that period. He was a very incredible person. So this is so fascinating. Robert Brown is a political scientist, and in 2020 wrote a book called Protectors of Pluralism. And it offers a fascinating look at network rescue, And instead of focusing on a single person or family hiding someone, Braun looked at how rescue often happened through groups, usually religious minorities, with strong internal connections and a degree of independence from outside powers. These groups tended to be collectivistic, with shared values and histories of being outsiders themselves. Because of this, these religious minorities were often uniquely positioned to help other minority groups in danger. But Braun also points out an important dynamic. When a minority group grows almost too large and becomes more focused on preserving its own identity, their empathy and willingness to help outsiders can actually decline. So it's fascinating to learn that he focused first on they're called the lowlands in Belgium and the Netherlands. And he found that in majority Protestant villages, it would be the Catholic minority who were more involved in rescue. And conversely, in Catholic villages, it tended to be the Protestant minority who were more involved in rescue. Now, some of these dynamics don't necessarily hold in other countries. For instance, in Italy, there was much more widespread rescue and not necessarily, Italy is also majority Catholic. However, there is a strong sense of shared identity, which contributed to that phenomenon, as well as in Denmark, where the Danish people as a whole came together to mostly help the Jews. And this wasn't a case of a minority being active in it, but there was that strong sense of shared identity as well as solidarity. So now this is the interactive portion. I invite you to enter the number of the rescuer you're interested in learning about in the chat box, and I will tell you their story. Okay, did I see number 3 first? Okay. This is a really beautiful story I just learned about this weekend. Lily and Manfred Polatz were German Quakers and teachers. When the Nazis came to power in Germany, they moved to the Netherlands and opened a school for orphans and refugee children, many of whom were Jewish at that time period. When the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands began, they were forced to close the school, but became part of the Dutch underground, temporarily housing some Jews while others stayed with them long term. Their house was searched 7 times, and on the second occasion, some children were captured as well as her husband was arrested. One of the children unfortunately died in a camp. The underground was able to rescue the other 2 children. Their son, Carl, so Carl is right here, was a medical student and had previously been arrested for refusing to enlist due to his religious convictions. When his father was sent to Dachau, Carl offered to serve as a medic in exchange for his father's release. I'm sorry, this still makes me cry. Carl was killed in action 4 months later. So despite these losses, and Lily was actually critically ill with breast cancer during this period, she continued her work in the underground and continued hiding children in her home. While working, I think that something else this is more of an anecdotal finding from looking at all these different rescuer stories. But what I find is that when the father is the moral exemplar of the family, the whole family tended to be really involved in rescue and in outreach. But when it was just the mother who was the moral exemplar, there would be maybe one child involved in rescue, but unfortunately not the whole family. So that's something I found in 5 families so far. And interestingly, all of these fathers were pacifists too. Oh, and when I was doing a lot of research on this family, I found some letters that one of the Jewish boy, he was a teenager at the time when he stayed with them, and he wrote complaining about how Lily could be very difficult and demanding. And so I love that even though she was so courageous and so generous and yet so entirely human. And I think that's such an important component versus when we look at saints or other heroes, sometimes they come across as overly perfect, and these were still very, very human, real people. And I think it makes their example far more achievable for the rest of us. Okay, did I see number 7? Okay, so this is a fantastic one. Josephine Melberg, aka the Countess Janina Suchodolska. The Polish Roman Catholic Countess Janina Suchodolska was actually a Jewish woman named Josephine Melberg. With her false identity as a Polish aristocrat, she negotiated the release of almost 10,000 Poles from German concentration and forced labor camps. She was born into a wealthy Jewish family, and her parents encouraged her to cultivate friendships with Polish children as well as Jewish children. And she learned to speak German, Yiddish, Ukrainian, Russian, French, and English, enabling her to convincingly play the role of a proud countess used to getting her way. And she went into the hell of Majdanek 5 days a week, continually advocating for improved conditions for everyone in there. She succeeded in increasing the food rations allotted to prisoners. For the imprisoned Catholics, she smuggled Eucharistic hosts for the priests to distribute, and she even had Christmas trees delivered for Christmas. She was a truly extraordinary woman, and I highly recommend this book that was recently written about her by Elizabeth White and Joanna Sliwa. She's a truly monumental woman, and unfortunately, her story was not known until the past 2 years. So number one, this is another, I love all of these people. Stefania Podgorska-Brzezinski and her sister Helena were Polish Catholic rescuers, and Stefania was only 16 years old when she began hiding 13 Jews in a house that she rented. She got forged papers, which enabled her to work in a factory supporting these Jews. Little Helena, who was only 6 at the time this rescue work began, was responsible for climbing up and down a ladder to the attic where the Jews were hidden every day. Helena would empty their waste bucket. She would fetch water from a well for them. And she was truly dedicated. Both of these incredible women were dedicated to their care. Unfortunately, at one point, the Nazis requisitioned part of their house for some Nazi nurses to be stationed there with them. It was an incredibly, incredibly tense period. Unfortunately, everybody survived and made it. One of the really beautiful aspects of Stefania's story is that she related how significant one incident was on the street. She was about 15 years old, and she saw a young Polish boy walk up to a Jewish boy and say, "You are a Jew," and he hit him. And Stefania said, a man, just an ordinary worker, saw this and said, "Why would you do that? He's a boy just like you. Look at his hands, his face. There's no difference. We have enemies from another country who say there's a difference, but there's not." Stefania said the offending boy looked sad and apologized and said, "Oh, I'm sorry." When she returned home, she examined her own face and hands in the mirror and concluded the man was right. And she said, "I listened and I learned." So what I love about this encounter, especially for teachers and for parents, is that a man unconnected with his children not only intervened, but he did so in a manner that was respectful and invited reflection. He didn't scold, he didn't shame, but he established connection and similarity. So this turned out to be a moment of transformation and learning for Stefania too. In this story and in another rescuer story, we really get to see the power of that empathic imagination and how much it can change people when it is accessed. So who next? Number 9. Oh, I love all of these people so much. So Marian Pritchard was an extraordinary woman. She had already been released from imprisonment of 7 months for simply associating with people involved in the Dutch resistance when she witnessed Nazis raiding a Jewish daycare in Amsterdam. She saw them literally throwing the children into the trucks. And she said 2 women came running from down the street screaming, "No, stop." However, the Nazis threw those 2 women into the truck too. And she realized in that moment, if she was going to be effective, she had to be smart about it. It wasn't enough to just scream and shout and protest. She had to be smart. She had to be sly. She had to be sneaky. And so she became very involved in the Dutch underground and was essential in taking children, Jewish children from their families and depositing them all over the countryside. And she would often have to pretend that she was an unwed mother. And on one occasion, she had traveled with this very fussy baby, and she finally got to the train station where you're supposed to meet her contact. And the man waiting there said, "I'm so sorry, the family who's going to take the baby was arrested. They cannot help you." And she looked so upset. He said, "Okay, you can come to my house for the night, and then you go back tomorrow." So she was exhausted and fell asleep as soon as she arrived. And when she woke up, the man's wife was taking care of the baby. and saying that because Marion was a sinful woman, her punishment was now that she would no longer be able to take care of her baby, and that family was going to take care of that child. And so she immediately recognized how this woman had framed the story so that her children wouldn't question why this child had been brought in. And she accepted the shame of being considered an unwed mother. This was a circumstance repeated all over Europe, not only by Dutch girls, but also by Polish girls who would accept that shame of being recognized as a woman of sin in order to care for these children. She was a really beautiful, beautiful woman. And she spoke about how influential her Anglican faith was for her, but especially because her father modeled those values so often on a daily basis. She said that he was always strict with himself, but always liberal towards others. And he never imposed his beliefs on anyone. Okay, number 10. The Greek Orthodox Archbishop in the Greek Orthodox religion is Metropolitan Damaskinos. So he was one of the very few members of a church hierarchy to protest the Nazis' treatment of the Jews. Archbishop Damaskinos wrote letters to the Greek collaborationist prime minister and the German ambassador in Athens, protesting the Nazis' deportation of Jews from Greece, including the quote you see here on the screen. Many other Greek dignitaries signed the letter to the German ambassador, and the Nazi general in Greece was so infuriated by the archbishop, he threatened to have him shot. Archbishop Damaskinos responded, "According to the traditions of the Greek Orthodox Church, our prelates are hung and not shot. Please respect our traditions." This brave man was neither hung nor shot and told the Greek Director General, "I have made my cross, I have spoken with God, and decided to save as many Jewish souls as I can. Even if I were to endanger myself, I will baptize the Jews and you will issue municipal documents so they can obtain identity cards as Christian Greeks." He requested that monasteries and convents across Greece hide the Jews and recruited the head of police to assist these rescue efforts. So number 2, this is another beloved favorite. Hermann Fritz Grave was a German Lutheran who cited his mother as the primary force in shaping his morality. Fritz's mother was extremely generous and well-loved in her community. Fritz described how she gave to everyone who asked and was active in volunteering with Catholic as well as Lutheran charities. And research has shown that this kind of universalistic generosity, extending beyond the usual family and cultural ties, is highly associated with altruistic and rescue behaviors. Like other rescuers' parents, she modeled making difficult choices in the faces of others' disapproval. Her mother criticized her for visiting her sister, who was imprisoned for murdering her husband. No one else in the family maintained contact with her. And Fritz recalled his mother suffering from this disapproval, but remaining steadfast in her decision, saying, "She is still a human being who needs company. And you, Fritz, what would you do?" And that was the question she posed to Fritz whenever she was faced with a difficult decision. They would discuss the options, the anticipated results, and decide together which one was ultimately right. And Fritz described hearing his mother's voice in his head as he watched the Einsatzgruppen murder 1,500 Ukrainian Jews at the death pits of Dubno, repeating the question she had posed to him throughout his childhood. "And you, Fritz, what would you do?" He became committed to helping as many Jews as he could. And he inflated the importance of a factory he ran, setting up satellite factories that were far from areas where Nazis were stationed, and provided forged paperwork. He also helped impoverished Ukrainians, and he was the only German to voluntarily testify for the prosecution at the Nuremberg trials. So great was the animosity against him that afterwards he and his family moved to California. So more rescuers described their parents as using inductive reasoning and explanations as means of discipline, and they tended to be victim-centered in their consequences, but issuing more reparative, restorative consequences, and encouraged autonomy, agency, and independent thinking, which we see in that question. "And you, Fritz, what would you do?" Parents tended to emphasize errors as mistakes to be learned from instead of intrinsic character flaws. And as children, rescuers did not perceive the punishment as gratuitous, but just. In contrast, bystanders' parents had a high reliance on corporal punishment. They provided less explanations as to why behavior was harmful, and they tended to emphasize obedience. So number 4. Oh, I love number 4. Raoul Wallenberg was a Swedish diplomat sent to Budapest with the objective of helping as many Jews as he could. This is a collaboration between the US and Sweden. His efforts, including the Schutzpass, a protective pass supposedly entitling the bearer the protection of the Swedish government, but it didn't actually mean anything, it just looked official. His Schutzpass is estimated to have helped approximately 100,000 Jews. And I wish I could play this clip for you. It wasn't working, but this is Agnes Adachi, who is a Jewish woman from Budapest. So she got a Schutzpass from Raoul Wallenberg and then became one of his right-hand helpers, also rescuing Jews. And in this clip, she would have described to you some of his rescue methods. So he would go all the way to the Austrian border and he would shout, I have your papers here, get out, Mr. So-and-so. And people would start to recognize, oh, this is my chance to get away. And he would say, all of you people who have my papers, turn around. And so, of course, many of the people there didn't have papers. And then he would say, get on my truck. And so they would get on his truck. And without having previously had any of these papers, he brought them 1,000 people back to Budapest. And he would read names out of a black book that he carried with them, hoping that people would catch on that, oh, this is my chance to get away. And once Per Anger, who was another Swedish diplomat, said, Raoul, when did you start keeping people's names in this black book? And he said, I'll show it to you when I did it. And he opened the black book and there's nothing in there. He tried to do whatever he could. He would collect any document that was in Hungarian that the Germans couldn't read and pretend that they were insurance papers or anything that could keep people off those trains and back into his safe houses. Unfortunately, the Soviets, when they occupied or took over or liberated Hungary, of course, it wasn't much of a liberation. They believed Raoul was an American spy, and he was taken into the gulags and never seen again. So it's a great tragedy that this hugely generous humanitarian, we don't know what happened to him. So who is left? Oh, number 6. The Trocmés, Andre and Magda Trocmé. There are several wonderful documentaries and books about the history of sanctuary and refuge that's been offered in the French region of the Plateau Vivarais-Lignon. This history dates back centuries to the persecution of the Huguenots and continues today, exemplifying Robert Brown's finding that religious minorities with strong autonomous networks and moral frameworks can run and sustain collective rescue efforts. During World War II, French Protestant pastor Andre Trocmé and his wife Magda were instrumental in nurturing and actively participating in this tradition, particularly through Andre's forthright sermons, which called on his congregants to use the weapons of the Spirit to overpower the Nazis. Although this was a majority Protestant village, this was an interfaith collaboration too, which involved Catholics as well as Protestants of other faiths who came together and helped as many Jews as they could. So there are thousands hidden in this region. And this assistance continued even after Trocmé was arrested, released, and then had to go into hiding. And what is also so personally extraordinary about their story is when the Gestapo came to arrest Andre, Magda offered to feed the Gestapo officers dinner first, which they accepted. It's also really beautiful that when there was a roundup of they were trying to collect some of the Jewish teens in the area, some of the villagers laid down in front of the bus that was going to take the boys away. Unfortunately, they were dragged away and the boys were ultimately taken to a camp. But that image of those villagers lying in front of the bus, I think about that so often and how they had the courage and the nobility to engage in these beautiful acts of nonviolent protest. So here, this is the results of a fascinating study that Pearl Alliner conducted regarding the impact of religious culture on the rescue of Jews in Nazi Europe. She contrasted Catholics and Protestants, as well as Catholic rescuers and Catholic bystanders. And she found the parents of Protestant and Catholic rescuers emphasized and modeled the value of caring for others, and especially others who were unconnected to them. There's a scene in Claude Lanzmann's Shoah, which exemplifies the bystander attitude so well, when a Polish man who lived near the death camp of Treblinka said, he says, it's this way, if I cut my finger, it doesn't hurt him. So I'll give you a moment to look at these lists and really think about what they reflect here. As a parent, as a religious educator, I find this list liberating because there are so many expectations placed on teachers and parents regarding the transmission of faith and doctrine and dogma. But when we look at who was willing to lay down their life for their neighbor, most often the rescuers cited how their parents spoke to and treated others. And now in her study of rescuers, the political scientist Kristen Renwick Monroe found that the value they held above all others was the sanctity of life, which aligns with Eva Fogelman's finding that for rescuers, morality tended to be more relative than absolute. So they were absolutely committed to this idea of the sanctity of life, but they were willing to transgress other beliefs in order to uphold that. So that meant rescuers lied, they stole, they forged documents, they did all of this in order to protect the other. And Elizabeth Midlarski and Stephanie Fagan-Jones found that rescuers were a very demographically diverse group, but they possessed a strong dispositional trend characterized by faith-based moral courage and a sense of social responsibility manifesting in heroic altruism. Let's see. Yes, I'm so looking forward to answering your questions at the end. Who haven't we hit? Oh, one of my very favorites, number 8. This is John Widener and his sister Gabrielle. Their father was a Seventh-day Adventist minister who refused to send his children to school on Saturdays, as then mandated by the Swiss government, because to him it dishonored the Sabbath. And his father was told that if he refused, he would have to go to jail 1 day a week. And John said, for 7 years, I see my father going every week to jail because of his convictions. As a little boy, that impressed me. The idea that if you believe something is right, you have to be able to accept the consequence of it. That also helped me make a decision during the war. I wanted to help. So John created the Dutch Paris escape line, building a network of more than 300 rescuers of all faiths who saved an estimated 3,000 Jews and more than 100 downed Allied pilots. His father was also imprisoned for protesting the Nazis' treatment of Jews, and both of his sisters were active in the Dutch Paris escape line. John actually faced the trolley problem. He was considered the most wanted man in Europe by the Nazis, and to capture him, they arrested his younger sister, Gabrielle, who you see here, and they sent word that if he were to turn himself in, thus destroying the escape line, they would release his sister. He agonized over this, but ultimately came to the conclusion that he could not destroy the escape line to save one person. And she died in a concentration camp just after liberation. I recently read a book of letters among the Widener family, and it was so beautiful to see how much he loved his sister. And he would say, Gabrielle, I'm sending you money for you I want you to go buy yourself a dress. I want you to take a trip. This was a very close and loving family. This wasn't a decision that he came by easily. And he did have the support of his parents, although they were grief-stricken by this. And again, this is another example of a family where the father was a strong moral exemplar and the entire family was involved in rescue. See, how are we on time, Geneva?
We're still good. We're 6:36.
Oh, good. Okay, so I had cut out some rescuers, and I saw. Oh wait, we didn't do number 5.
Yes, Carol put number 5 there.
Thank you, Carol. This is one of my all-time favorites. This was Leopold Socha, a former thief who used the sewers of Lvov to escape after he robbed people. He underwent some sort of conversion, married a devout Catholic, and became a sanitation worker. And it was there in the sewers of Lvov that he encountered Jews seeking to escape during an action. And initially he agreed to help them for money, but when the money ran out, he said, no, you are my Jews and I will continue to protect you. A family with 2 children was in the group. And it turned out that they were related to the victims of his biggest crime. He had robbed their great uncle. So Socha every day would crawl through miles of pipes, bringing them food, books, and spending time with them. He took their clothes to his wife to clean. And this helping him in this work actually helped her overcome her anti-Semitism. Socha was moved by how one of the Jewish men continued to pray and light candles underground. So Socha began to go to the church every day to light candles for them. He repeatedly expressed the hope that this work would make amends for his former life of crime. And this is Christina Chiger. She's still alive. She's a retired dentist in the Northeast. So she hid in the sewer for 14 months with her parents and brother. And this is the green sweater that she wore for the entire period. There was a point where she became very depressed and began to lose hope as she even stopped eating. Her parents were desperately worried and told Socha. So the next day he came for her. He led her through miles of pipes and let her go up through a manhole cover to feel some sunlight on her face and to breathe fresh air. And he promised her that one day she would be free again, like those other children, not to lose hope. And so she was so moved by his concern for her, she began to eat again. As the war ended, he prepared temporary accommodations and furnishings for them. They called him their angel. And there's this beautiful, extraordinary element to this story, because after the war, when the Russians had taken over Lvov, he was riding bicycles in the street with his daughter. And there is a Russian truck being driven by a drunk Russian soldier that was about to careen into his daughter. And he sped up and was able to shove her aside and was himself crushed directly over a sewer. And so I really marvel at the symmetry of this story and the sincerity of his convictions and his commitment to changing his life. It's really beautiful and profound. And Christina wrote a beautiful book about her experience. It's called The Girl in the Green Sweater. So I highly recommend that one too. And then I saw a question, and there were other atheist and communist rescuers. I had them included, and I thought I was going to run out of time, so I took them out. But next time I would promise to have them in. There was a very famous communist rescuer named Antonin Kalina, and he was responsible for a barrack at Buchenwald where Elie Wiesel was. And so he would do everything in his power to protect these boys, these teenage boys. He tried, even though they had such rough conditions, he tried to hold kind of a school experience for them, educating them. When they came to collect all of the Jewish boys, he said, no, you've already taken them, but there aren't any left. And so somehow the Nazis fell for that in the camp. And so they're called the Buchenwald boys, and they credit Antonin Kalina's deep care and conviction and affection in caring for them. And he said he was simply following Kant's categorical imperative to always be as moral as he could. See, so I think that we hit everyone here.
Did you do number 9? It looks like
we did. Yes, that was Marion Pritchard. I can show you. So this is Saint Elizabeth Hesselblad. She is the only righteous among the nations to be a canonized saint. She was also the first Swedish person to be canonized in 600 years. As the Mother Superior of the Brigittine Convent in Rome, she saved over 60 people by hiding them in the convent. And a Jewish man who was there as a child remembered that the nuns helped displace fascists as well as Jews. And he said, something which bothered me back then, but which I now understand, was that the nuns who helped us also helped fascist families. There was great solidarity because everybody was suffering, and we finally realized we were all in the same boat. So I was part of a group of graduate students invited to go to the synod in Rome this past fall. And my cohort was actually staying in the Brigittine convent. I couldn't believe this, just a remarkable, I don't know, coincidence or what. I was so grateful to stay in that very convent. And so this chapel you see was actually the crypt where the Jewish men were hidden during the war. And now it has been converted into an interfaith chapel where the Swedish Lutherans hold their worship services twice a week. So I thought that was such a beautiful continuation of that interfaith collaboration. And opportunity to come together and work for a better world. And I'm happy to take any questions.
We had a question from Bill Timaeus, I believe. In a book I co-authored with a rabbi about the rescue of Jews in Poland, we rarely found rescuers explaining their decision with a religious reason. Rather, it was more likely that they simply knew the Jews before the war. Do you find that same thing elsewhere?
I think it depends on the population. I mean, certainly if you're looking at, say, a group that like the religious networks, like the nuns and the priests, that's different. They often felt that they were fulfilling the order to love their neighbor as themselves. So I think it really depends on which population you're looking at. I know for John Widener, for his rescue network, he felt that he was doing God's will, and he would go through a process of discernment where he would try to figure out, am I doing this for myself to show off, or am I doing this for God? Now, Otto Springer was a rescuer who did it. He said he engaged in rescue just because the Nazis made him so furious. And I heard a similar sentiment from Yoshi Voss. So I think there's a lot of variety, I guess, in that answer. I don't know if that answers your question. There are many different reasons. And I'm not sure if you read Eva Fogelman's book, Conscience and Courage, which delves into the different motivations. She categorized rescuers according to the motivations. So some were religious. They established their religion as the basis for their choice to rescue. Others said it was part of their profession. So that would be like the doctors, social workers, diplomats, and others, it was for more of a moral reason, unconnected with their faith. What's also interesting is that diplomats tended to face harsher consequences if their government was not aligned with their rescue efforts. Many of them ended up penniless and unemployed because they had helped the Jews without the permission of their government. I am so excited to look your book up. Thank you for sharing.
We have a few questions about you. The first, do you speak at any Holocaust museums?
I haven't yet. Most of my speaking engagements have been at Catholic schools and private schools and to Catholic groups, although I did speak at SMU's Yad Vashem, or not Yad Vashem, Yom HaShoah event a couple of years ago, but I'm always happy to go wherever I'm invited. This is my greatest pleasure. And the first time I've actually had to give a presentation where I intermingle more of an interfaith aspect to it. So I really enjoyed that challenge. Thank you.
Well, you're doing amazing. So then there's also someone who would like to know how you became interested in this work and if any of your research is published yet.
Oh, thank you. My favorite book when I was little was called But No Elephants. And it was about Grandma Tildy, who every day a pet seller would come to the door and say, "Would you like to buy a pet?" And she would say, "Fine, I'll take a dog, I'll take a cat, but no elephants." And so ultimately, she buys all the animals from this pet seller, and ultimately, there's just the elephant left. And it becomes, he's like, "Well, I'll just have to leave the elephant here outside." And so she's like, "That's fine. I told you I can't take an elephant." It'll begin snowing, freezing, and she feels sorry. And they're all inside the house cold. And the elephant comes in. And because he's so big and takes up all this room, he's able to carry them to paradise. And so when I was very little, I love this idea that that thing that we keep outside can actually be something that takes us to paradise. And the first time I read Corrie ten Boom's The Hiding Place, I was like, this is amazing. Here's somebody who's actually doing what we're taught to do, to love our neighbor as themselves and putting everything on the line. And so with these books as the kind of the basis, I kept going and reading more and more. I didn't think I could actually ever do anything with this until I went back to school to earn a master's of religious education, and then realized I could bring all of these actions together.
And is your research published yet? I know you're still working on your dissertation, right?
Yes, I'm still working on my dissertation. I did have one article accepted at Religious Education. It hasn't been released yet, but I'm looking forward to that. And so that article is called Righteous Tricksters. And it's looking at the ways that how rescuers helped. They seem to break all of these moral laws. Like I said, they lied, they stole, they forged. And how can we kind of find a way to accept that within the parameters, especially within like the Catholic Church, where children are told over and over, the ends don't justify the means. And so what does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself in circumstances that require you to break not only legal laws, but possibly moral laws as well?
Well, you'll have to send us a link to the article when it's published.
I'll be happy to. Thank you.
Valerie has a question. Why do you think there are not rescuers in the world today?
I think there actually and absolutely are rescuers in the world today. And I remember reading just after the events of October 7th about a Bedouin driver. So again, this is that minority part coming up. I think he was driving people from one of the festivals, and he kept going back to getting more and more. And there's a beautiful documentary series too about rescuers during the Bosnian genocide, and of Jews helping, of Muslims helping, of Catholics helping. And so you can find these stories. You just have to look for them. Unfortunately, they aren't as widely publicized as the more graphic and gruesome ones, but they're there, and they're so beautiful, and they are so important to share. And that's why in my work, I want to encourage religious educators to turn to the Righteous Among the Nations database, because it's this extraordinary collection of people who really put themselves on the line. And there's all of this research about them. And there's also research about how they got there. And so trying to bring this together and really, really help students and parents live out the values that we espouse.
So I'm wondering, given all of the current crises we're facing in the United States, particularly under this administration, all of the threats to sanctuary, mass deportations and things like this, what do you think we maybe could learn from the rescuers, and what could be applied in our context today? If you have any thoughts on that, I would be really curious.
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite, they're all my favorite. One of my favorite rescuers, Irene Gott-Opdyke, who hid 12 Jews in the house of the Nazi major where she worked, always said she didn't mean to become a rescuer. It started by something very small, by leaving food at the edge of the forest for people who were hiding there. Similarly, so many other rescuers say it started with a very small act. And once you make that small act and you're successful at it, you gain the confidence to go bigger, go longer, go stronger. And I think, so one, I cannot recall her name right now. Her form of protest began with saying "Drei Liter" instead of "Heil Hitler." And so the first time she said it, she's like, wow, I got away with this. And she started doing more and more. And so finding those little ways, those little things you can do, make the big things much more achievable. It really does begin with those small steps. And I love too Marion Pritchard's revelation about it wasn't enough to just shout no. If she wanted to be effective, she had to be smart about it, and she had to be sly. And so that's something I think about too, is like, does it make sense to put a big protest online, or is it better to go and find small ways to help people around me in a more physical and concrete way? One of the, so I think Eva Fleischner said that she's a political or a social scientist who's also studied rescuers. So she was walking on the street with a rescuer, and she said, the woman rescuer said, "Oh, look, there's that, I'm so worried, look at that little girl." Like, and she said, Eva had seen this girl and she didn't think anything of it, but the rescuer saw the girl and recognized she looked like she was in distress. Her mother wasn't nearby. She needed to intervene. And so cultivating that sense of critical awareness where you don't just move through life, but you try to see what's going on around you and who is in need around you and how can I address that. And I think that makes our current political reality easier to navigate.
Thank you. And I think based on that follow-up question, so was there any kind of, interfaith organizing movement behind rescue? Were there faith communities that acted, or was this just a movement of individuals?
Almost every network rescue was an interfaith collaboration. Even when they're, even looking at the minority rescue networks that Robert Brown looked at, not only did they use their own network, but they relied on trusted outsiders. And so I think that's another really important aspect to rescue, is that it was much easier to be helped when you already had existing contacts outside of your own community. If you were insular, it was much harder to be rescued, versus if you already had those contacts. So I would say, if you look at every rescue network, it was always an interfaith enterprise. It included communists, it included atheists, it included Catholics, Protestants, agnostics. I mean, it was not just the religious.
Thank you. I think we have another question from the audience. I noticed you noted a variety of details that contributed to the courage that led to being a rescuer. Is there a list of factors you see recurrent in rescuer courage that families can be sure to model and teach their children?
Absolutely. I love this question. One of the big differences between rescuers and bystanders, even perpetrators' families, was that rescuers noted their parents tended to avoid using demeaning or derogatory language about others, those who were outside of their group. And not only that, they were very generous towards those who were outside of their own family or their faith community. So they didn't restrict their charity. So if they were just Catholic, they didn't just give to Catholic charities. They didn't just give to family members. Irene Opdyke, the rescuer I mentioned before, she remembered her mother taking in Roma women who were sick in the forest. She would take them into her own house and care for them until they recovered from pneumonia. And so that example was placed very early and very deeply. And I see that in so many of these stories, in the Polatzes, in the Wideners, the parents really practiced what they preached. So be generous, look out for outsiders, and cultivate awareness in your children too. Like, encourage them. Who looks like they're left out? Who looks like they're not here at this table? Like, who could we invite in? That's so important. And there's such small things that can be so significant in these critical moments. I love this quote from John Widener. And I think it captures so well the heart of this presentation. It's essential for us to cultivate attitudes and ways of being that extend generosity and mercy towards everyone, not only those who share our name, religion, culture, or any other identity, and encouraging critical thinking. So, well, who told you that? Why did they tell you that? Why did they want you to think that way? Fritz's mother, and you, Fritz, what would you do? All of these encourage that empathic reflection and active caring, especially towards outsiders. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this.
I'm seeing one more question from Carol. The help sign for teens and women have been widely publicized. This is another group without an ethnic or religious group that needs help from rescuers. I guess she's asking if you see teens and women as a group that would benefit from rescuers. Carol, please jump in if I'm not interpreting your question correctly. I'm correct. Okay.
So I'm not sure I understood it. Could you? I'm not sure I know what the help sign is. Could you explain that to me?
Sure. There's ads on TV, for example, of a woman putting her hand behind her back if she's being walked along the street with a man, and it's open your, she makes opens her hand and then closes her fingers over her thumb behind her back as a symbol, as a signal that she needs help from that person. And so I just feel like many times we look at, or I guess I'm particularly conscious of families being deported, and frequently they are people of color, and or non-white, however you want to describe it. But I also know that the teenage, like abducted children, missing children, and women who are in abusive relationships are also often afraid to speak out, and they may not be known otherwise. So I just wondered, sadly, there are many groups that I feel, sort of need our help, could benefit from someone stepping in.
Absolutely. And that's so true. That's a vulnerable population today too. And I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you. And I was unaware of this help sign. I don't get to watch much TV. I'm always studying or taking care of my kids. But thank you so much for educating me about that.
You're welcome.
We are about 2 minutes to the hour. Do you have any final thoughts or questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and join in the conversation or write in the chat.
I can show you one other rescuer I took out. I thought we wouldn't have time. This is Princess Alice of Greece and Denmark. Every time I give a presentation at an all-girls school, this is almost always the first rescuer they choose to hear about. She was Greek Orthodox, the mother of England's Prince Philip, who was born deaf, yet she learned to speak English, German, French, and Greek fluently and could read lips in each of those languages. During the Balkans War of 1912, she volunteered on the front lines. And in 1943, she hid the Cohen family in her apartment at the Royal Palace. When Nazi soldiers questioned her, she pretended she couldn't understand what they were saying until they gave up and left. After the war, she founded the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary. And you see her here in her habit. Thank you all so much for having me. It was my great pleasure. I agree. I absolutely agree. I hope they get to hear about this. And it's so important in how they speak, especially in their homilies. So yes, to love each other.
Well, thank you so much, Amy, for this wonderful presentation, and to all of you for being here, being engaged, asking wonderful questions. And I'm not sure if you have any follow-up readings or resources that you might recommend, but I'd be happy to send them out to our participants, as well as some information about your upcoming article.
Absolutely. Top three books really quickly. There are so many. The Altruistic Personality, Conscience and Courage, and The Hand of Compassion. But I'll put that in a letter to Geneva.
Wonderful, wonderful. I will send that out along with the recording as well, in case anyone wants to share it, and for those who were unable to log on but registered. So thank you, Amy, really. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
And have a great rest of your day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.